Welcome back for the second half of our publishing symposium, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lori Matheson, Director of the University of Illinois Press, and it's our privilege to be presenting this publishing symposium today. Following on the terrific and inspiring conversation we just heard about leveraging scholarship to speak to new audiences, we now have a panel about reaching new audiences with innovative strategies for marketing scholarly book and journal content. Joining us are marketing experts from the University of Notre Dame Press, Cornell University Press, and Duke University Press. And I just want to give my heartfelt thanks to our colleagues for joining us today and sharing their expertise. As we get underway, let me express my appreciation to Dr. Joanna Groden and Mary Frances Smiley in the UIC Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research, as well as Dr. Mark Canuel at the UIC Institute for the Humanities, who are co-sponsoring the symposium with us. Thanks also to Michael Rue and Heather Gernans for their leading roles in developing and presenting this symposium. And again, I just want to express my gratitude to all of our panelists for making this symposium so meaningful and full of new information. And now, without further ado, let's learn about marketing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lori. I'm Michelle Sybert. I'm the Assistant Director at the University of Notre Dame Press, and I am delighted to be your moderator for this conversation as part of the University of Illinois Press Publishing Symposium. Today's conversation brings together two of the most innovative marketers in academic publishing, and I know it's going to spark a lot of questions. Feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box as they come up, and we're going to leave a bunch of time to discuss them at the end. Our panelists for this evening are Jocelyn Dawson and Martin Beanie. Linnell White, the founder and market strategist at Nautilus Advisory, unfortunately had an emergency come up and isn't going to be able to join us today. Martin Beanie is the marketing and sales director at Cornell University Press, and he's also served in the same role at the University of Nebraska Press. He has served on and chaired the AU Press's marketing committee and presented on a variety of marketing topics at that meeting and elsewhere. Jocelyn Dawson is the journals and collections marketing manager at Duke University Press. She has served on committees of AU Presses and the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and is a previous member of the SSP's board of directors. She currently serves on the SSP's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and co-leads the Toolkits for Equity project to develop anti-racism guides for scholarly publishing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, as many of you know in our audience, the academic book market has contracted and changed drastically over the last few decades with the rise of open access, budget cuts leading to fewer library purchases, and of course, the pandemic on top of everything else, creating new challenges for research and teaching. Many of these factors together have increased the need for presses to communicate or market directly to scholars. Jocelyn, would you be willing to start us off and tell us about the resources that Duke University Press has created to assist faculty in promoting your content?
Sure. Yes, so for those of you who are book authors and journal article authors in the audience, we really see you as our kind of biggest advocate for your work. We know that when you're communicating with your colleagues about your work, that's much more effective than we as publishers could ever be. So at Duke, we really try and provide authors with some tools. We have a project called Share Your Article. So that means that any author of our journal, of an article published in one of our journals, receives a toll-free link that they can share with as many people as they want in their network. And folks can access that for free for the first 3 months after publication. We also provide authors with some sort of tips and tools for ways that they can share their work. We want them to update their faculty profiles. We want them to give us names of folks that might consider the title for course adoption. And then, of course, if they've got a robust social media presence, we always encourage them to share that way as well.
That sounds fantastic. Martin, what are you seeing as the future of direct marketing to scholars?
Thank you, Michelle and Jocelyn. And I should just say quickly that Michelle is also one of the most innovative marketers in the university press world. She maybe didn't give herself all the credit she should have done there. Yeah, I think the thing that I'm really interested in is how do you help authors tell the story of their work beyond the obvious and immediate market for that story. You know, a lot of scholarly monographs are aimed at a very narrow subset of academia. There are a certain number of people interest in certain things. And I'm always intrigued as what do we do moving forward that will expand that potential reach for any given book, whether it has a very, very narrow audience or potentially a large one. I think the future is in some ways a little bit of a continuation of the current. I think there needs to be a focus on content marketing. So in other words, not content beyond the original content, which I realize sounds crazy when you're an author writing something like a journal essay or a book, and then a marketer comes along and says, oh, and by the way, you need to write something else, or you need to produce something else. But I think those something else's are one of the ways, or a very good way, that we can engage with non-traditional audiences for academic work. We were just quickly, we were just having a hackathon this morning at Cornell University Press, where we were brainstorming some things like this. And there was talk about what if introductions were turned into infographics for books, so that people could actually, who weren't experts in the field, could perhaps understand a little more and engage a little better with content that was, really, really sort of important, but maybe just beyond their original comprehension. So I think ways to share what people are writing about beyond the original audience, I think that is a continuation of the present and very much going to continue being the future for a little while.
Awesome, thank you so much. Jocelyn, are there other things that you're excited about seeing with the future of direct marketing to scholars?
Oh, goodness, yeah, I was just thinking of, in terms of authors telling their stories, I was thinking about a very, very specialized publication that we had, which was about a dialect of a certain region. And we were not estimating very many print sales for this, but we had someone who was so passionate about the subject that he got all of the native Texas German speakers, it seemed, to buy this publication. So, really reached a general audience, which was fantastic. And we had to reprint. We had to keep reprinting our marketing postcards. So, yes, I think that Martin's point about if an author's put in so much work into their article or their book, just getting them to do a little bit more can be really, really effective. But yeah, in terms of the future of direct marketing, yeah, I do think we're seeing more tools like Kudos is one where it's an organization that will allow authors to create sort of a lay abstract for their work that's discoverable. A little bit beyond the price point for us as a university press right now, but they do something similar where they'll email all of the publishers, authors, and ask them to create this lay abstract and give them advice about sharing, and then authors can access different statistics and so forth. But yeah, we're, I think, trying to find our way around GDPR for some of our direct marketing. So for folks that aren't familiar with it, that's the Data Protection Act that the European Union came out with that really changed our ability to reach some of our direct audiences. So in the past, we might, if we had a journal that we really wanted to promote, so say we really wanted to promote our journal, INCA, Journal of African Art, which is actually based at Cornell, if we had wanted to market it to part of the African Studies Association audience, maybe in the past we could have bought their list, and then we could have sent them a postcard, or even bought their email list and sent them an email. But GDPR has completely tied our hands, so we're trying to figure out some new ways to reach these audiences. So we're doing more kind of placing banner ads and newsletters of different scholarly societies, and we are sometimes paying for campaigns where I'm trying not to give you all too much information from the weeds, but we'll work with a third party who has a relationship with an audience, and they'll send things on our behalf. So they're not giving us the list; they're sending something out that we've prepared for them. So it's more expensive than the kind of direct marketing that we used to do, but yeah, it has been surprisingly successful so far.
That's awesome. And I just really want to stress two things that you both really said that have come up for us as well, is that author impact makes all the difference, and that an enthusiastic and eager author can make a huge difference in an academic monograph only reaching a few people who are specialized in that field and really having it take off and be a huge success for the press. So we really appreciate the work that our authors do. The other thing I want to stress that Jocelyn just mentioned is trying to find more unique partnerships. And that's something that authors, again, can really help with, is identifying some of these groups who can reach out to colleagues. So that's fantastic. Thank you both for those gems. So shifting the direction just a little bit, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to talk about your efforts to encourage greater diversity and equity at your press, and especially if either of you have found particular ways to do that through your marketing campaigns.
Jocelyn?
Sure. Yeah. So at Duke University Press, we've had a DE&I, or actually ours is just Equity and Inclusion group for about 4 years, and yeah, I'm so proud of the work that we've been able to do. It's had a lot of engagement. So several dozen people at our press have been actively involved since the beginning, and we now have subgroups of our E&I group. But the first project that we did was to expand our job posting list. So we saw that we were posting our jobs to networks that were not going to bring in a diverse applicant pool, and we made a concentrated effort to change that. We've also sought out a lot of training opportunities. So we've partnered with Duke Campus to bring in. We had a Trans 101 training. We've had an implicit bias training from someone on campus. We've also brought in a consultant to do a bystander intervention training. So really giving all of our staff the tools that they want and that are going to help create a change within the workplace culture. Because I do think through my work at Duke University Press and also in the toolkits for equity, I think what we really want is to see Black, Indigenous, and people of color come into our industry and then want to stay there, because for a long time, there have been pipeline programs that have brought BIPOC staff in, but no one else was doing the work to make the culture inclusive and welcoming. So yeah, so we've done a lot of work to look at our workplace culture and see ways that we can improve. And an area that we're expanding into is accessibility and disability. So so we're just at the tip of the iceberg with that. But I think this is such a rich topic, in thinking about accessibility for ebooks, alt text for our marketing images, but then also how are we supporting staff with disabilities? So we we have a whole slate of programming that we can do around that topic, and we'll be exploring more over the next year. Martin, I'll let you go now, and then I could say a couple of things about different campaigns that we've planned around this topic.
Yeah, sure. I'd be interested to hear. I think the most impactful thing we have done so far as a marketing team is to hire a former Mellon Diversity Fellow into a marketing position. So for those of you who are unaware of this, this is a grant-funded program that has primarily involved hiring diverse candidates into acquisitions positions at university presses. And we just recently hired a publicist who had been a diversity fellow at Chicago, and she had previously interned with us in the marketing team prior to that. So in sort of, picking up on what Jocelyn said in terms of like getting people to stick and to want to stay, I think that was probably the most tangible thing we could have done so far. On a more sort of actual marketing side of things, so Jocelyn, you just mentioned alt text and accessibility. We had to go through a whole thing, we went through a whole thing with the university in terms of making our website accessible. So we have, we spend a lot of time as the marketing team working on the website and making sure it is as accessible as possible. We do use alt text as much as we can for our images on our website, and we certainly do throughout our books. We've also just made choosing our images that we use in our marketing campaigns. We've made that a very intentional thing to avoid the homogenization of those images. So, we do this on a daily basis within, say, a social media campaign or an email marketing campaign that we use images in. We do this for our article/blog part of our website. And we also do it as part of the discussions we have for covers, which really in the end boils down to a marketing tool. So we've certainly made these. We have, I think, intentionally chosen to make this a focus of sort of the building blocks of marketing campaigns. So that it has, I think, at this stage already has become something that we just do, rather than something that we have to stop and think about. And I think that kind of like normalization of this is really making a difference in how we present ourselves, beyond our own boundaries, if you like. So yeah, I think all of those things.
That's great, thank you.
So with our, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you'd be willing to share one of the specific campaigns you mentioned, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we are really proud of as a publisher is that we publish a lot of really great work on race. And so, so we were able to create a syllabus of recommended content around racial justice, and another one about police violence. We had this kind of abundance of really strong content in those areas. So those were two syllabi that we, and actually I'll put a link in the chat, that we put together, that we felt, it's a kind of a small effort, but to try and hopefully encourage course adoption that might lead to, more undergraduates getting exposed to some of these ideas. And then I think also, like many university presses, we saw a real increase in interest in our titles on race after the past year. So we have done everything we can to make sure that we can get those books into the hands of readers. So making our books print on demand. We've had great books. In the Wake on Blackness and Being by Christina Sharp has been a book that's just had phenomenal interest, and just making sure that we can get these books into the hands of readers has been a big effort for us. And then I'll go find that link and I'll put it in the chat here.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you. And while Jocelyn is looking for the link, Martin, would you be able to elaborate a little bit on whether those graphics that you mentioned, being intentional in the graphics, whether those relate to an accessibility standpoint as well?
We do try to, yes. I won't claim that we hit the highest standards there. I wish I could say yes every time, but it is certainly something that we are trying to do. Some of the sort of holdups in some ways, and it sounds ridiculous, but the internal resources required to make sure everything meets the standards that we would like to are to the point where we don't have the internal resources to dedicate to it and still kind of do our jobs. So the short answer is no. The subtle answer is yes, as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. And that's something as well, if there are additional questions on that, please get them in the chat and we'll make sure that we can come back to those at the end as well, because I know we're going to cover a lot of topics fairly quickly. And then really, depending on what our participants are most interested in, we can really dive into these topics more, because we've got a lot of things to discuss. All right, excellent. So the next one, of course, as we all know, we have been experiencing a global pandemic that has vastly transformed how scholars are able to access materials. And especially for a period there with many libraries being closed or many scholars working from home, there was a great need for far greater need for digital resources. What have each of your experiences been with trying to make content more accessible electronically, and then also creating new resources that can facilitate teaching and learning?
Well, I know that we've added more ebook vendors, both for institutions and individuals. So we partnered, we have new partnerships with Gobi, DeGruyter, JSTOR, and Muse, all to make sure that we can get folks the content electronically. And our customer relations manager had shared with me that, you know, not only are we serving our customers, making sure libraries have current subscriptions, but then for libraries that are very small and haven't had e-resource librarians in the past, and then suddenly needed to shift to having all these e-resources, we were also sort of kind of on the front lines for access questions too. So, so a much more hands-on role with helping people navigate the site, troubleshoot access problems that than we've had in the past. But yeah, Martin, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
There you go. I finally hit mute or unmute. I think the pandemic has, from a marketing standpoint, opened things up in just a whole slew of ways that perhaps we never expected. And I think the appreciation for, need for, and appreciation for and need for digital content has gone through the roof. And I think, you know, we're very much in an industry that has, you know, typically has focused on the physical artifact, you know, and I think those sort of some of those long held, the book is sacred beliefs have changed, and this has opened up a lot of potential avenues from marketing and from publishing positions in sort of more general senses. So to give it sort of an example, I think I'm going to use the term reviewers in a very broad sense. So whether that's media or peer reviewers or readers or scholarly journals or whatever it may be, all of a sudden over the course of, you know, really just the first few months of the pandemic, quickly shifted from we have to have the print book or the pieces of paper, you know, printed out individually and stuck in a packet and mailed to us. We don't need that anymore. In fact, we don't want that anymore because, oh, look, we can't access it. It's stuck in a mailbox somewhere. And so there has been this huge shift where all of a sudden interacting with digital words, with long form digital, has become much more everyday. And I think that truly has opened up a lot of, it's saved a lot of resources, it's saved the environment a little bit, and it has made it much easier for us to get our content to anybody in the world when they need it. So, you know, a reviewer in Australia, all right, we can print locally in Australia. It's still going to take a little while to get that print book to them, whereas the digital file is in their hands, you know, now, right? So I think that has really changed things a lot. I think the way that you know, Cornell has been involved in open access content since quite early on, for many, in the sense of many university presses, you know, and we opened up content that we hadn't opened up before, even if it was only temporarily last year, you know, to make things more accessible when people really needed them, really wanted to engage with particular sets of scholarship. A lot of this happened in the wake of George Floyd period, and some of that stuff then closed back up again. But what we learned was that there is an appetite for temporary free access to content that perhaps we would never have known about had we not had that opportunity to experiment. So we've opened up some new content. We have continued to build our open access program, and this is actually a constant thing for the marketing team. Is how do we market this? It's free, it exists. What do we do with it as a marketing team? And you know, this is, I think, we were talking about the future of direct marketing earlier. I think one of the futures of marketing in some ways is, what do we do with this stuff that is free? How do we turn that into a brand, into a story? How do we make that help, not just help academics gain access to that content, but help us as a publisher continue to do what we do? So yeah, I think the shift to digital that has occurred over the last 20 months, I hope won't shift back. I hope, that we will be able to maybe tap into this sort of a little bit of the zeitgeist and maybe stop even, his radical thought, stop producing print books and just do digital books and see what happens. I realize that's a step too far right now, but anyway, that's.
Well, I was going to say, Martin, that it really, the timing couldn't be better because we're seeing these huge supply chain issues.
Right.
So for those who haven't been following this closely, book production schedules are getting pushed back by weeks, sometimes by months, because there's a shortage of paper mills. A lot of paper mills are now creating corrugated cardboard for all the things that people are having shipped to their house now. There's delays in getting things into ports from overseas. So so we really have a lot of obstacles in our supply chain, and the electronic is just, it's much less cumbersome.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, I think the supply chain, I think all of this is tied together, right? Pandemic, supply chain, potential inflation, et cetera, what are we all going to do as this happens? And, I was being flippant there saying let's get rid of the print version of books, and yet we have actually started having as a thought exercise this kind of conversation to say what would happen if a certain portion of our books, we actually started with what would happen if we published everything digitally. How would that impact things, right? Like, could that be sustainable? What would that do for the environment, right? I mean, are there ways we can actually make this a positive situation? But yeah, I doubt very much we're at the, we're seeing the demise of print before our very eyes. But I think, Jocelyn, you're absolutely right. There are going to be a lot of our audience as authors who all of a sudden get a notification here in the next couple of months. Very sorry, but your book is delayed 6 months. We can't publish it right now. Or if you're interested, we could publish the digital version and then maybe a year from now, see if there's a need for the paperback or the hardcover. I think that would be an interesting way to look at this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So Martin, you raised specifically open access as well, which I think is a really great segue to talk about that. And open access, of course, has its whole own set of opportunities and headaches for university presses and for authors. But today we're just going to stick to the marketing question, which Martin asked earlier. How do we market something that's free while also ensuring that the scholarship we publish has the biggest impact possible?
You want to take this, Justin, or do you want me to carry on my
No, I feel like I keep going first, so you go for it.
The answer I have for you all is I don't know. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this because, so I think off the top of my head, I think we have maybe, call it 500 books available open access on the Cornell list at this point. That represents about 10% of our list. Marketing, developing and building the open access brand for Cornell University Press takes way more than 10% of our marketing resources. In fact, it takes way more than 10% of the whole press's resources. And, so on this sort of very dollars and cents line, for me as a marketing director, I'm thinking, well, like, should I spend my limited resources here? I mean, we are seeing thousands and thousands of downloads of some of our open access books, way more than we would ever sell of this thing. And at this point, we're doing almost nothing other than making it exist. We have a dedicated portion of the website. We tweet about it. We moment. And yet, what would we gain by turning those 5,000 downloads into 10,000 downloads? And I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, obviously, because we would gain people reading and interacting with our content. But as a marketing team, and essentially the end result of our efforts has to be making money for the press. And yet, I cannot make any money off of the downloads of those free books. So I think that's the sort of the pessimistic or whatever. I think the real the real thing we need to do is use, I was talking about developing content earlier, right, that helps tell the story. And really what we're talking about in some ways here is using the existing content that is free to tell the story of everything else we do, right? So if we have, we've just made a handful, 20 or so of our books under our ILR Press imprint open access. These are books in health and medicine disciplines. And, these books have been out for 3 to 10 years. They've essentially stopped selling as a print volume or as a digital volume. And, now we have the funding to make them open access. So now my job, I think, as a marketer is to take that and say to all those people who are interested in our health and medicine list, here, look, check this out. It's the gateway drug, right, to the rest of our health and medicine list. So I think that's what we need to do. I think at the moment we're sort of sitting on this precipice or on this fence of like, how much do we shift over to start using that content in that way and to start putting those resources into that when there might not be an immediate return in terms of sales. So yeah, Jocelyn?
Yeah, it's a little different on the journal side because we market our open access journals the way we do all of our other journals. We make sure people are getting to the content by having them be discoverable and indexed, and just the same way we do with our subscription journals. So yeah, I was thinking about how do we make sure that they're sustainable and that the press is not incurring a huge loss for publishing them. And yeah, so our open access journals, most of them are on platinum open access models where they have a single funder or a handful of funders. And these are usually institutes. When one journal is published by an institute, that gets a ton of funding from Mellon. And our environmental humanities journal has a couple different university environmental centers that really support the journal. But these journals also rely on the royalties they get from being part of our e-journals package. So yeah, so I think that we have been thinking about how do we make sure that these journals that have a really, really wide reach then don't just start sucking all of the royalties from our other journals. And we've come up with a business model that we think that will control for that. But yeah, so I think the concerns are pretty different in terms of marketing on the books and journal side for OA.
Can I just jump back on? So obviously we have authors and potential authors as our audience tonight, and I would say that if you're, I don't know if you are all tied to or connected to the University of Illinois, and I don't know what the situation is there exactly, but if you're looking to publish a book and you want the broadest audience possible within academia, look and see if you can get open access funding. I mean, Jocelyn was talking about platinum open access in terms of a single funding body or a granting agency. I mean, if you can go to a university press and say, look, I've got $15,000 to make this book open access, I, as the marketing director, will almost certainly bite your hand off at that opportunity, because most of the books we publish won't make $15,000, right? Like that's the sort of, the sheer unfortunate side of things. So if you can go with that, and from the author's side of things, sure, that's a lot of money to bring to the table to a traditional relationship that didn't involve this kind of transaction. But as I said, books that we publish, so we, whether it's an old backlist book or a brand new book that we're publishing open access, the sheer number of downloads of that open access version far surpasses anything we would ever sell in whether it's digital or print copies. I mean, it's, getting your scholarship, your work read, open access is the best way to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. And the last question that I want to discuss before we turn to some of our really great audience questions. So if you are sitting on a question, please go ahead and put it in there so I can start planning out how we do that. Really centers around this idea that Martin just said, which is how can authors actually help? So what can authors, journal editors, contributors, whether chapter level or journal article level, do to really help their academic book succeed? Should everybody sign off this conversation and create an Instagram account and turn into like a book blogger? What kind of author efforts in your experience have really had the biggest impact?
I would say please don't create a social media account if you're not going to sustain it in the long haul. Nobody wants to see a Twitter account that had five tweets about the one publication and then goes dormant. So I think if you already have robust social media, that's a great tool. But yeah, Martin, I'd be interested to hear what you think. I don't know that we do this in practice, but I do think when we have enthusiastic ed offices and special issue editors, it would be really helpful to have a conversation at the beginning about what we're, what efforts out of the gate are we going to do for their publication, and which are going to have the biggest return, because we would much rather spend time on the things that we know are going to be successful. We've spent many hours creating videos over the past 10 or so years at the press, and the payoff really hasn't been there. So I think that there's a lot that can be said for just an author having a conversation with a publisher about, okay, well, realistically, what have previous authors done that have helped their books to be successful, or which efforts do you find are the most successful? So rather than pursuing things that publishers may know from experience aren't as productive. And then let me see, I'd written down a couple notes on this. So I mentioned earlier, updating your faculty profile, sharing ideas about folks that might use it for course adoption. And then also on the journal side, if you have posted your article in a preprint server or an institutional repository, ask them to link to the final version of record. That's a great resource for us. We really, as journal publishers, really encourage you to share links rather than PDFs, because when you share a PDF sort of outside the institutional system, the library doesn't get to count it as a use. So a lot of libraries are making their purchasing decisions around journals based on a metric called cost per use. So if you want to support the journal that you're publishing in, the best thing you could do is to drive people to the version of record via URL. And if that person doesn't have access, then maybe we'll turn the other way, and you could share a PDF. But that's really ideally what you would do would be to make sure that you're driving people to that version of record.
I think you just said something, Jocelyn, there about expectations. So what is interesting to me is I think having realistic expectations as an author is a big help to a marketing team. So coming in and thinking, you have the next superstar memoir that's going to be on all the talk shows on Sunday morning or whatever, you might do. I'm not. If you do, I take it back. But chances are, as publishing with a university press, that is not your book, right? So the expectations, the book tour and all these things that you think maybe a publisher used to do for authors in terms of marketing, I think having real expectations and having a conversation not just with your acquiring editor, but with your marketing director or publicist or whoever it may be at the press, to talk about and ask them to be real, not to, because on our end, if we have to tell them, oh, I'm really sorry, but your book's only going to sell 100 copies, that's a difficult conversation to have if the author is not open to having sort of expectations realistically set. So I think it's that expectations is both ways. Not only what can the publisher actually do, but what should the author hope for or expect or wish for. The other side of that, it really is what can you do. So I think academic authors should shamelessly self-promote. And I've said this over the years to various groups of academic authors, and there's sheer panic. I can't see any of your faces right now, but there's this, oh my gosh, this is against kind of the way we do things in a way. But honestly, that shelfless, that's shameless self-promotion is what will help spread the word of your book. So word of mouth, and you can take word of mouth to be anything you want, whether that's social media, literally telling somebody face to face, writing something in a blog, going on a podcast, whatever it is. It's all word of mouth. It's all basically sharing the fact that you have published a book, it's really good, and that somebody else should read it. And I think it sounds sort of trite, and it sounds, a little bit, yeah, of course, but really tell people that you have published a book. Share that information. Don't be coy, don't be shy, don't hope that your academic advisor might pick up on the fact that you finally published your dissertation work. Tell them. So yeah, I would say realistic expectations in both directions is a big thing. And then as an author, just be prepared to sort of shout it from the rooftops and be excited about the fact that you have a book. Others will be too as a result.
Yeah, and I think sort of really reevaluating what success means. So success is not just selling the most copies of a book. We want to sell books or have journal articles read by the most focused and dedicated audience. So so as a mission-driven university press, we are successful when we're reaching a small niche of the academic world and providing them with content that's going to move that field forward, as opposed to having a viral listicle, that sort of thing. So so we're producing really high quality work for small dedicated audiences. So it's not necessarily the most eyes, the most sales that means success for our project.
Okay, great. And now, since we have just a little bit of time left, I want to turn to some of our audience questions. So I'm not necessarily going to go in order. I'm kind of going to try to cover as many different topics as we can and reach as many people as possible with the questions I think that may be most of interest. So feel free, if you didn't get your question answered, to hang on a little bit after the panel officially ends, and we'll try to get everybody's question answered. One of the questions that I wanted to ask first really ties into this idea of author promotion. I think it's going to be an easy question for us to answer, but we'll see what our panelists say. Should virtual conferences still maintain the strict boundary between the exhibit hall, where promotion is permitted, and panel talks, where promotion is generally not permitted? Some virtual conferences, of course, have no exhibit booths at all. So should authors then be allowed to self-promote with discounts or promo offers on the panel when there are no exhibits allowed? And it also notes, of course, academic authors often loathe self-promotion as it is.
I mean, sadly, it's not up to us. We don't control the conferences. You know what? So if I was at a virtual / hybrid conference and I was giving a presentation, I would have a copy of my book on the table. And you wouldn't even necessarily need to say anything about it. It's right there. Maybe stick some flyers on the chairs as you walk into the room, a little handful, pass them out. I realize that might break some promotional things, but ask forgiveness, right?
For several of our journals, we created Zoom backgrounds that were, featured their journals, and we also created backgrounds for some of our authors as they were doing Zoom launch events. So that's you don't have to say it; it'll just be in the background. Yep. But yeah,
agreed.
But I think putting a coupon code in the chat, you don't feel like you have to hawk it, but just if you're interested, here's the coupon code. You're doing folks a favor. You're saving them 30% or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. And here is a question for Jocelyn, I believe. Would you be able to explain a little bit about how a press earns revenue from journal articles? Of course, selling subscriptions to a journal is one that most people are commonly aware of, but what are some of the additional revenue streams that our audience members might not be aware of?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Duke University Press has an aggregation of humanities and social science journals. Not an aggregate. They're all published by us. And we sell subscriptions to our electronic journals package to libraries, and 90% of our revenue as a journals program comes from libraries. So in addition to hosting hosting this journal content on our own platform and doing direct sales ourselves. We also have some journals that are on that are in aggregations like Project Muse or JSTOR. It's not all of our titles, but Project Muse, for example, they have a wider reach than we do. So some smaller journals that we feel like aren't going to get the royalties that they need to sustain themselves through sales of our own journal collection will also have the content in Project Muse. And Project Muse gives royalties to publishers based on usage. I think there's probably other things that go into their formula, but we're really counting on those library subscriptions, which is why I'm promoting share the link, not the PDF.
Okay, great, thank you. And now a question for both of you. Is there a particular style of writing that you suggest for authors as they're working on their books that might help to increase interest in sales? And especially for ones that are a little bit more specialized, I think is really kind of what the question might be around.
Should I go ahead, Jocelyn? Okay. So don't all shoot me at once, but I don't think the writing style is the issue. I think it's the subject. Most people, sadly, do, or maybe because of the way it is, don't read the book before they buy it. So what you need is a subject that will grab somebody's attention and make them think, I'm interested in this. The writing style from therein, that's probably more of an editorial thing to discuss. I mean, the less heavy you can make it, the better, sure. The less theoretical, the less deep, where somebody has to truly understand something in order to sort of comprehend it, if you like. I think that would obviously help, but I think that's less important for me, at least. When I'm in my role at the press, when we're talking about a new project, I don't ask how good is the writing or what's the writing like. I'm curious, like, how many people are interested in this subject, right? Because if only 20 people are interested in this subject, you could write Pulitzer-worthy prose, and still there would only be an audience of 20. But if there's an audience of 2,000, we can hit all those people because of the subject. So that's, I mean, it's it's not an answer, I realize, but I actually think it's less important than the subject matter.
I think part of that too,
I would say. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
Go ahead, Michelle. Yeah, I agree with Martin, because we've tried to write marketing copy for journal special issues, so kind of themed issues that we market like books, that we barely could create a description because these publications were so incredibly theoretical, and they had some of these have a huge audience of people who are just geeking out. They there's really, really high sales for those issues. So, so I think I, as a reader, I would always say I appreciate the more accessible academic publications, but yeah, that there are people who love to geek out on that super theoretical, really esoteric language. And at one point we had a running list of words that our authors had created that. And added to the academic vocabulary.
Okay, fabulous. And then what I was going to mention too is that goes back to that author involvement of, if you are writing a book on a specialized topic, be aware of it and provide your marketers with, like, here is what, your elevator pitch. This is what I tell my grandma about my work. Or this is what I tell my kids about my work, or my, my freshman level students. So get us excited about it and help us understand how to get other people excited about it as well. All right, and then one more question, if we have time, we can fit it in, is what are the trade-offs to authors in working with a publishing agent?
Jocelyn, in journals, do you run into agents much?
No, I'll defer to you, Martin.
Great. I think if you're interested in an agent, then you're probably not publishing with the university press, because as far as I'm aware, no university presses require agented submissions. The trade-off, a good agent will take a long time to find and accept your work. But a good agent, once they do, is going to get you, it's going to get you past the gatekeepers at the major trade houses. And we don't have that. We don't have that access. We don't have that reach. We don't have those marketing dollars. However, they, like I said, you've got to get one, which is not the easiest thing in the world. And B, you have to pay them a percentage of what you make. So a little bit, this goes back to, who do you think is the audience for your book? If the audience for your book is, 5 million people across the world, maybe the agent is the right person for you, because you're going to get, a 6-figure deal or whatever from a New York publishing house. If your audience is the other 200 academics who are working in the same field, then you don't need an agent. I mean, it's not going to help you. So that's what I would say. It's there's good and bad in all of these things. I think but it really does depend what kind of book you have.
Okay, thank you so much. And that officially is the time we have for today. So I want to thank everybody for joining us and for sharing their questions. And I want to give a huge thank you to Jocelyn and Martin for sharing their expertise with us. Thank you so much for joining, and have a wonderful evening. If you want to stick on a little bit, if you didn't get your question answered, we can try to answer some of them quickly. But otherwise, I know it's the end of the day for a lot of us. So again, thank you so much for joining and for such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
And then if you guys are willing to stick on just a little bit longer, a couple of the questions that came up, one of them went back to exhibits. Whether due to policies against third-party exhibitors are now facing frozen travel budgets, if presses can't exhibit on site or virtually, should they be, or are they more open now to third-party exhibits on their behalf?
I mean, I personally wouldn't pay a third-party exhibitor to exhibit my books. I think that's just a waste of money. I think as an individual author, your book is lost. There is nobody selling, quote unquote, your book. There's nobody marketing it. Nah, I wouldn't do it. If I can be really, really honest, right? Even the biggest exhibits, a small percentage of attendees go into the book room, and an even smaller percentage of those people go to each and every book display. So to me, that isn't like, that is not the best way to reach your audience. I appreciate the shout out to David Mitchell, by the way, because he does do a good job in a tough environment. I think at the moment, I would say we can reach those people in those fields without being in the physical space. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can't speak for my colleagues on the book side, but on the journal side, we publish 60 journals. There's no way that we can have a physical presence at all the different conferences that are relevant to those journals. So we actually do find third-party exhibitors like Scholar's Choice to be a good option for us. And I once attended the American Society for 18th Century Studies in person, and Scholar's Choice was one of only a handful of exhibitors. So they had a ton of traffic. So I think it really depends on the size of the meeting, whether or not they're going to get lost, whether or not your book's going to get lost. So it could be a good way to reach folks if there's not a better way to get to that meeting.
Great, thank you. And then do you have guidance that your presses tend to provide to prospective authors on the maximum word length for books? And does that vary by the subject area? And this may be a bit more of an editorial question. So.
Yeah, that's not an area that I can really speak to.
Yeah, same, sorry. Yeah, it might say something on our, we have an information for authors section of our website that you could check out.
That sounds great, thank you both. And then, so there was one of the questions earlier gave a great description of the kind of book that he had been working on. It was a scholarly work, but was really written with a kind of a general, a narrative nonfiction style that was intended to be as accessible as possible. So another attendee followed up and asked if sort of those kinds of books were books that university presses would be interested in. So academic work or scholarly work, but really written for a general audience or for, again, like that freshman style reader.
I would like those far more than, yes, those books I can sell. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on the university press. University presses publish all sorts of things. Not everyone's doing this, super theoretical, highbrow sort of stuff. There's presses that are publishing, wonderful books of poetry, books of regional interest. There are presses that publish novels. So, so don't think of us only as publishing professors and not able to reach a more general audience. I interned at the University of Virginia Press, where George Washington's Book of Manners was a kind of a long shelf life, kept bringing in that revenue. So so I think it really depends on finding yourself the right press.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, and the UNC Press had Mama Dip's cookbook, a great restaurant in Chapel Hill. That cookbook has done phenomenally well for them. So, we do all sorts of different things.
Okay, awesome. So the last three questions could easily be a very big conversation, and I don't want to keep you guys too far after. So just without totally getting into how complicated of a concept this is, do you feel there's still a place for direct mail marketing? And is that something that you do to promote either your journal's content or your book content?
They must know that I have not paid our annual fee on our permit at the post office that we were maintaining so that we could sell, so that we could send direct mail. Yeah, we have not had a need for it. So we've really moved away. We mail our seasonal catalog of books and journals, but very little else other than renewals.
See, I don't even do the catalogs anymore. No. Yeah, it's an expensive way to market with very little way to track the return. So I think that I know some presses still do invest in it. Yeah, I would not spend a lot of money on that. I think that would be an easy way to lose that money.
Great, thank you. And then how about your email list? Have you guys found ways to expand them, or what are you doing to try to get more names on the list, especially given the GDPR restrictions?
Yeah, so with GDPR, we can contact people with whom we have a business relationship. So we have subject area signups that we are always encouraging people to sign up for. We have issue alert signups for the journals, so we can contact those folks. So a lot of what we're doing, and this is a nice thing at Duke, we have a lot of synergy between the books that we publish and the journals that we publish. So, so oftentimes we might market a journal special issue to book buyers in a certain category. Sorry, I had to slip synergy in there. Go ahead, Martin.
I think we have, the precise numbers, I don't have, tip of my tongue, but I know we have increased our overall email lists, to the tune of a couple of thousand over the last year or so. It's, like you said, Jocelyn, if you have a business relationship, and that can be defined in a lot of different ways, you can get that email. So the previous question was about, is direct mail still a thing? I would say email is still a thing. I would say that is one of our most effective ways to market books still. I think, we spend a lot of time trying to encourage people to sign up for our emails so that we can contact them and let them know of all the good stuff we're doing. One thing we have sort of shifted a little bit is we don't do the hard sell quite as much in those email campaigns anymore. It is obviously part of the email campaign, but it is a bit more content driven.
Great, thank you. And then our last question is, how do you feel, or where do you feel the services like MDR and Brian Murphy Group fall on the spectrum of GDPR concerns? Are those services that you're still using? And for audience members who may not know, these are services where you're basically buying names or buying lists, or paying for them to send out content on your behalf to their lists.
I'm not paying for lists, haven't done for years. If there is If this question came from a fellow publisher and they want to chat to me directly about those two particular groups, I would be happy to do so, not in this space. But yeah, organic marketing makes a lot more sense to me than paid, and this would fall under paid for me. So
yeah, we haven't on the journal side worked with MDR, the Brian Murphy group. So yeah, so my hope is that they that they would be in line, but I really can't speak to that.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much for hanging on afterwards to get through all of our questions. I've really enjoyed this conversation so much and learned a lot from both of you. Thank you again.
you're welcome, Michelle.
Yeah,
thank you.
All right, have a great evening, everybody.
Bye.